Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Corona Café discussions. These discussions are organized in partnership with the Alliance Française de Nairobi, the Elephant, and the French Institute for Research in Africa. We would like to extend all our participants a warm welcome for these virtual discussions that invite us to reimagine Kenya in the context of COVID-19 and more importantly after. So please allow me to welcome Dr. Mshai Mwangola, a moderator for the Corona Cafes, who will introduce our distinguished panelists for this Corona Cafe. Welcome, Mshai.
Thank you very much, Asita, and it's indeed a joy to be here for our third Corona Cafe. It's been such a journey so far as we reimagine Kenya. Those of you who've joined us before know that what we've been trying to do with the Corona Cafes is to stop, pause, and reflect, asking ourselves that even as the pandemic has forced us and forced everybody across the world to stop and reflect, will this be a new turning point in the history of the world and more specifically for our purposes of Kenya? Is it possible that we will emerge out of this pandemic with new ideas and able to foster social progress through creating new models? We acknowledge that the pandemic has revealed our strengths. It's also pointed out areas that we must pay attention to. And so in the first and second webinars, we looked at health and social inequality. It was such a joy in the first one to be joined by Dr. Bosire, Dr. Aya, and Dr. Masese. And then in the last one, we were joined by activists Wangoi Kimari and Abubakar Zain. And what began to emerge is that indeed we should be using this moment to envision our way forward to sustainable, people-centered systems of resilience. And so in this webinar, we pick up on some of the issues that we saw emerging when we talked about health, how easy it is during this time to push aside critical sectors as we go back to business as usual with politics. And yet we realize that if we don't pay attention to health and now to education, we are playing with the very fabric that holds our society together. Last time, we talked about the real consequences of the social inequality that characterizes Kenya. And today we'll be thinking about how these translate to the reality of the great education divide. So it's such a joy today to be joined as we talk about education by two esteemed walimu. So I had Madaktari, then I had the activists, now I have walimu. And so I'd like to start by introducing Mr. Clifford Oluoch. Clifford is the head teacher of Premier Academy. He's the co-founder of Homeless of Nairobi and the founder of Shule Mtaani and one of the team of volunteer teachers who teach there. Clifford is also an author and he's a prolific author. He's written the fiction series, The Eastlanders, as well as textbooks in creative writing and mathematics. And it's such a joy to say, Karibu Mwalimu. Or do you prefer to be called Odijo?
Any will do. Odijo, Mwalimu, it's okay. Sir.
Okay, that's a new nickname I have learned for you. What does it mean? Many of us are there. Those of us who know, of course, and others who are thinking, what does that mean? So okay. Why Odijo?
Well, Odijo is also generational because it has changed. Odijo actually means teacher. For the old generation. For the current generation, I've just realized that there's a new word. It's actually Mode, right? So it's no longer Odijo. So there are those ones who call me Odijo, the old generation. And the young guys nowadays call me Mode. So I just Mode.
And that nickname is generally associated not so much with your time. And I know you've worked extensively teaching in the formal system before you became head teacher at Premier Academy. But really it's associated with your work at Shule Mtaani. Could you just say a little bit about Shule Mtaani?
Well, Shule Mtaani is what I would call the Instead of people going to school, which is a traditional way of learning and schooling, Shule Mtaani is the other way around. It brings the school to the street guys. So we take the school to them. Because as one of them said, I will learn, but I won't go to school. So we said, okay, fine. If you learn, but you won't go to school, so we'll get the teachers for you and we'll bring the teachers to you, we'll bring the school to you. So Shule Mtaani is a space whereby we bring the teachers to the street guys, which is the other way around. And that's how they learn informally, at their own pace and at their own time. So hence, Shule Mtaani. So there's no fixtures, there's nothing, it's just informal.
So what you're able to do at one and the same time is you're working both in the formal system and in what many of us would consider an elite school. And then you're also working Mtaani. So you're already bridging the educational divide that we'll be talking about.
Sure, yes.
Okay, I look forward to hearing more about that. And then I also want to welcome our other panelist, Dr. Wandia Njoya. Needs probably no welcome to those of you who surf the virtual spaces looking for somebody who is talking about education. Dr. Njoya is senior lecturer and head of Department of Language and Performing Arts at Daystar University. And she's also somebody who I can say has honestly earned the title of public intellectual, and she does focus on education. Let me just say that Dr. Njoya has won the Bloggers Association of Kenya's Best Social Issues and Active Citizenship. She's the winner of that blog for 3 years running, I believe, Mwalimu. And you have now moved on to become a V-blogger. And she's a V-blogger on Maisha Kazini. And some of the conversations that we will be having today, if you're interested, please go and check it out. The current series, which is on Mind and Soul, specifically engages questions of education. And I'll be picking up some of those issues that you raise as we go along. Mwalimu, you seem really invested in the virtual sphere. And I know in a discussion we had some months back on the elephant, you told me that you have extended your classroom to the virtual space. Why? First of all, what does that even mean, to extend your classroom to the virtual space, and why? Mwalimu, I think you might need to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry. I decided to make social media my classroom. So the things that I would like to teach, but for structural reasons, I can't teach them. I decided to bring them to the social media. But also, I feel that the Kenyan public needs to hear some of the things we are saying, because this touches on our society. So that's why I moved. Yeah.
And so for you, education isn't just about what's happening in the schools and with parents, but it really is a conversation for the society must all be engaged in.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, when I started teaching, I had the dream that our classroom doors could be open and anybody could come. So I decided to just do it online.
Oh, well, I look forward to hearing more. But I'm going to just now start by diving right into our discussion. We are in the middle, several months into the pandemic season. And I think next to the issues with health, issues with education is what has consumed the public sphere. What is it that we are seeing now that for you, both of you, is ringing alarm bells? What is it that is so amplified that we can't but stop and pay attention to? I don't know, I was about to say Mwalimu, then I realized it would be any one of you. So Clifford, do you want to start? You're a teacher, you're a head teacher, you're a teacher on the front line, you're one of the frontline workers. What for you, one or two things that is just ringing alarm bells?
Maybe it's a disparity. I'll give you 3 scenarios. Scenario A is a Premier Academy where we have full-fledged online classes going on from kindergarten to A-levels, right? So learning is going on or schooling is going on. Good, great. So parents have paid fees and the kids are actually engaged. So that's one scenario. Scenario B is a children's home that I run in Gashie, where we have 32 kids who attend public schools. So they're at home. and they're not engaged in any kind of online classes. We tried, 2 or 3 of the schools tried, but again, it was through, WhatsApp, kind of, right? So kind of a mix. Scenario 3 is Shule Mtaani, which is now bang in the middle of the slums. And not only do we deal with street boys, we also deal with students who live in the slums and live in the slums, but go to public schools. And there, nothing is happening. So the first alarm bell is actually the huge disparity within a span of, should I say, 50 kilometers or even 25 kilometers of each other. So we're not talking of rural, we are talking of Nairobi, just within Nairobi, you have that kind of disparity. That's an alarm bell, If this continues for another 1 year, then basically you have people who have, should I say, a head start in life. Doesn't mean that they are ahead, they just have a head start, right? And that actually concerns me. Of course, there are other social issues that come about with teenagers being idle and that kind of thing, but that we'll talk about later on. So that to me is actually the first sign of alarm.
Okay, and that's true, everybody's talking about, and you're right, we think usually rural, urban, things like that, but just even within the same, in one county, you can already see that beginning to play out. Dr. Njoya, what would you say is for you the most glaring alarm bell?
I think linked to what Clifford has said, I think the other one is the private cost, even for those who are able to pay some of the cost of education, they are realizing that it's more expensive than they anticipated. So even before the pandemic, they were paying for extra materials for their children and they were doing extra work as parents. But now with the pandemic, they have to pay the cost of the technology. They have to sit down with their children, and also they have to pay for internet and all those things. So I think there's an increasing awareness that of the disparity, not just because there are people who don't have access to these things, but even those who thought they can afford, they're realizing that it's more expensive than they anticipated.
So indeed, the question of how we finance our education, whether it's coming out of our pockets or whether it is the government. I think I saw something in the last 2 days which said that schools have not been given any money. I think they only got 1 disbursement this year and we're halfway through the year. So for public schools that still have to keep the infrastructure somehow functioning, that have to look after staff and things like that, even before we also then come to what is the cost to parents who are being told we've got to go into e-learning. That's a whole new other conversation. And now that I've mentioned that, apart from what is being amplified that already was part of our infrastructure and the environment, we now have we're all now discovering the delightful world of e-learning or going virtual, whether that means radio, television, or computers. What can you say that this pandemic season has what is new about it, about the fact that we are now, I mean, we've always had curriculum learning, or I think KICD has always done radio programs. Many schools have always done computers. In fact, a few years ago, we were talking about we must move the public system into education. And remember, there were the promises of tablets that something didn't quite get together. But what's new about this new time to do with this area of virtual learning?
Well, I think the most important thing, or the newest thing about it, is that we were dragging our feet about moving into electronics, digital completely. And the pandemic just kicked our backside and told us, guys, hey, move, you're moving too slowly, right? And that's, again, maybe later on we'll talk about it, is a disconnect. Almost most of the people who have smartphones don't realize that actually the power of the smartphone, right? The ones who have it, not the ones who don't have it. And I've had teachers who have had to teach from home using a smartphone, and it works, right? And they didn't know that side of it. So I think one of the things the pandemic has done is just to shake us and tell us, hey, I think you need to move to the next level of thinking, kind of, whether it's an elitist thing, a small percentage of it, but hey, guys, this thing is right in front of you, make use of it. It's a pity. Had we honored our promise of the tablet, I think it would have been very far now, very, very far, kind of. It's unfortunate that we didn't do that. So to me, that's the biggest thing that the pandemic has done. It has actually shown us that we can continue with teaching and learning even if schools are closed down. That's what it has taught us.
So can we sit pretty and say that all of us, you gave us a disparity with 3 different levels. Can we say, we know that Kenya is one of the countries in Africa that we're doing really well in terms of digital everything. Can we say that we can then sit pretty and say, really, even though we have kids in all these levels, more or less everybody's continuing to have an education because we now have virtual learning? And I'll ask that to Clifford, because I know you're working in the different levels.
Actually, that comes in my last presentation, or my last actually talk, which is about the involvement of the community, right? I grew up in a time whereby the community was very strong. And one of the things we had, we didn't have a television as a family, but the community, there was a community hall that had a television. And it became actually a congregation point for watching news, for watching football games and boxing games and whatever kind of thing. That has died. Okay, so much later on, years later on, the community is no longer involved as it was. If it were, then we'd have those community halls, and I would just put up a screen, and I would have different classes, different people coming. The ones I would like to do the same thing in deep sea slums, kind of, right? I just put up a screen, I put up a TV. Okay, in the center we have a TV, but because of social distancing, we have not started any formal lessons per se to the secondary school students. But the moment you get the go-ahead from the government, we'll do it. Okay, so back, yes, we can sit pretty and say that learning is going on, but we can also not sit pretty and say that everyone is involved in trying to reach the people at all the levels. We are not reaching the people at all the levels. And we've got the ability to do so. We have it. We're not using it at all. Okay. So the community, back to the community. Yes.
Okay, and I was going to say, Mwalimu Wandia, I know you've talked and written a lot about this divide, this class divide. That means sometimes we sit pretty and we say, yes, we're doing something, but not everybody is achieving it. And I'm interested, especially because I know you're at the university, and I saw University of Nairobi students, for instance, I think are going to court because exams are supposed to happen or have been happening. And they're really concerned that not every student is able to participate as they should be. What are your thoughts on this particular area?
Yeah, just to tie on to what Clifford has said, I think what this time has done is to push us to be a bit more flexible and more creative with teaching, but it's still not enough. We have to think of other ways in which we can reach students and not just limit it to tech, because you can teach in an open field, it doesn't even have to, and you don't even need tech. You can use storytelling and other things. And I think that kind of imagination is what we have not yet allowed in the education system. For the universities, I would say that that's actually the problem, because I think they can come up with other ways in which to help students, to reach out to other students. I think we need to be more flexible with exams. For example, of course, I can't comment directly on the particular university, but we can even say, do exams need to be done at this time? Can we wait until we meet? Or, things like that. I think the issue is flexibility that we don't have, and we are not very imaginative about other ways in which we can do what we do. And I think universities tend to be the most rigid of them all, because we have those, that's what we used to call it when we were young. We have like a status to protect, and so we tend not to be very flexible in terms of thinking of another way to do something.
And indeed, I find that in the public sphere, we've not been worrying so much about universities and higher education because it always seems that people feel that that's an elite problem, even if some of our students actually come from very humble circumstances. Now, I wish we had time. If we did, I would love to go into the question of how did we come where we have come from, the history of education, going back to the colonial era, through the independence, through the many different systems, and to look at Kenya within the global situation. And please, if you can bring this in as we continue to go into the conversation, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I want to zero in on this question of the great education divide, right? And Clifford, you mentioned that we have this the idea, the whole thing about class, depending on the kind of resources, the kind of community that a school is situated in and is serving, we get different kinds of education. There is the issue of geography that you alluded to, that we know in Kenya every year when we see the exams come out and we rank the counties, certain counties start looking for themselves from the bottom, right? And other counties are looking for themselves from the top. So we know that there's also a rural-urban divide. We know that there is a problem in terms of so many schools, so many curriculum, right? There's the Kenyan system, there's the American system, there's the British system, there's homeschooling, doing different kinds of things and so on. And so we are really divided education environment. What are the consequences of this? And because this is, I think, some of the things that for me have been amplified during the pandemic season is that we're not even talking about an education system. We're talking about several education systems all in one country, and each of them is doing different things depending on what their challenges are. So let's talk a little bit about that, and whichever area any of you wants to talk about, but within this education divide and the consequences, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well,
go ahead, Clifford.
Okay, sure, no problem. I don't think it's a big issue the way it has been amplified. I think the biggest, let's say, problem or challenge will become the parent. The parent doesn't know what to choose. So it's confusing to the parent. But if you look at the teachers, the teachers themselves move from one school to the other school, from one curriculum to another curriculum. So we have British curriculum schools with 70, 80% of the teachers who are locals, who are not trained in Britain. So what does that tell you? It tells you that there's something about the content that is actually constant, it's consistent. Whether it's an American system, 3 + 3 will be 6, right? Whether it's whatever, British curriculum, American curriculum, 844, the content and the knowledge remains consistent. What varies is actually the methodology, what they call the pedagogy, that is slightly different. And what I've always seen is that with the difference between the third world and the first world is the pyramid effect, right? Whereas in the third world, there's a lot of emphasis at the bottom, at the nursery, the prep school, the secondary schools, because the places at the university is limited, because it goes like this, right? So the higher you go, right, the more, the less opportunities you have. So it's kind of a knock-off system. So the base is actually very, very wide. But the top where Dr. Wandia is very narrow. Whereas in the in the first world, it's the opposite, right? Completely. They start very slow. And then I think literally when they reach the university level, they're being begged to go to the university, right? Guys, go to the uni, right? So back to your question, all these education systems are not an issue, because what we call the essential skills, which is literacy, numeracy, thinking skills, all those are the same completely. But the biggest difference that you'll find is that students from poverty-stricken areas have got hunger. They've got hunger for education. Whereas the students from the privileged systems have got this kind of, should I say, privileged situation whereby we know we are going to go to uni whether we make it or not. So the hunger is not there. That's the biggest difference. Back to the parents, when they're choosing, and when I'm talking to them, the only thing that I insist on is that To me, the most important thing is not the knowledge, the content, or the curriculum. The most important thing is the character of the person. That to me is a bottom line. If you have character, then you can fit into any of those systems completely. And that's a message I give the parents all the time. Yes.
Wandia?
Wow. Okay. I think the different systems. Gosh, I've just drawn a blank. I think there might be a problem at the level of curriculum, especially what histories and language they are being taught. I know the CS for Education at one point insisted that everybody must do Kiswahili, which is good, but I don't know yet how that is playing out in the education system, and that applies also to history. What history they are learning. The second inequality at curriculum level might be in the arts. The schools that are better endowed will probably be teaching the arts to their children as opposed to the schools that not have resources. And so you find that because the arts gives us the ability to imagine and to extend beyond our limitations, then you find that the people who actually need that skill are not getting an opportunity to practice it through the arts. So that's at the level of curriculum. There's another problem which I've had being talked about, but I have not yet seen any evidence of it. But I've had people say that people who go to the foreign curricula are given better consideration when it comes to employment. I'm not sure about that. But that could be a problem going forward if people feel that a certain curriculum is going to be more, better than the other. But this is not to say that the curriculums are necessarily better. I think like what Clifford is saying, what the problem is in the perception. What does it mean when you have a certificate saying IGCSE and you have another one saying KCSE? What does it mean in the marketplace? Is it going to discriminate against people? And then there's also the same kind of discrimination when it comes to the schools, that there are some schools with the right names and there are some schools which are not known, quote unquote. So most of these issues are outside the school system, but they have an impact on the classroom because the parents and even the kids start getting nervous about, am I doing something that will improve my chances, or am I just, following a dead end? Yeah, so that's where the problem is in terms of the different curricula that we have in Kenya. But okay, I think, sorry to say, I think when you don't have enough public schools, then that is inevitable, because once you leave it to the private sector, then you're basically, it's free fall. People can offer what they want since it's being paid for.
And people will go where they think they'll get more value. The reason I was asking that question is last week when we were talking about, the last fortnight when we talked about social inequality, one of the things that began to emerge is how divided we are as a society. So one of the things that occurs to me is that in another 10, 20 years, we're going to have a generation that emerges that even the core where people who went through, say, 844 or 763, you have, if you want, generational blocks where people will say, we all studied the same thing. When you say something, we've read the same books. We've all gone through the same history. We will not have that. And given that, if you look at the British curriculum or the American curriculum or South African or wherever else our curriculums are coming from, what they put at the center of those curriculum is a prioritizing of the needs of the philosophical orientation to this country is the best country in the world, to making that country the center of the universe, which is a natural thing to do. What starts to happen when we have a society where the elite, and the elite could be political, business, whatever, the people who have gone through certain systems are oriented towards certain countries, which are not Kenya. And then the others are like, those of us who went through the Kenyan system, we can talk to each other. But then the ones who went to other systems, we don't have that across the system. That's why I asked the question. And I wonder if any of you has a comment on that.
Yeah, and in fact, even the way it's not even just within the same generation, it's now across, from the old elders to the young people. Like I keep saying that my teachers were in the colonial system. They did the CAPE and all that. Then I did 763. I'm teaching 844. And now I'm teaching 844s who are going to teach in CBC. I mean, it's such a disjointed system that generations cannot speak one another because we are busy asking, do you do this? When I was this is what I did. When I was in school, this is what you did. So the knowledge that we accumulate outside the syllabus gets lost because we are busy trying to find each other and find out, did my parents learn this? Did my children learn this? Are they going to be able to teach the same thing? So it's we are fragmented. The education system is fragmented within the generations and between the generations.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you then, what are the priorities that are emerging as we are in the present? Hopefully, one day we will, I really love the image that Arundhati Roy gives, that we will emerge into the portal of the future. What priorities would you say characterize this moment? And Clifford, I want to start with you because the question I'm wondering is, you work in all these different areas. So I'm looking for the priorities that run across the system, but also that you are both a teacher as well as an administrator. So you're seeing the education system from different levels. You're also a parent. What are some of the priorities that you think we must use to give us a vision for the future?
Thanks for that. Well, just also to tie in with what Wandia said and what you've asked about the fragmented, should I say, education system. It's not as fragmented as I would like to think, because for me, one of the things that the baseline is that you're dealing with human beings. Yeah. You're not dealing with robots. And I would like to go biblical a bit. The 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments from the days of Moses to now. Whether you have a smartphone, you have a whatever kind of thing, it's the 10 Commandments, right? Because it's about character. I went to a school whereby the product of the students from that school, even right now, and 30 years ago when I left, is the same. Why? Because of the character and the pastoral component. So as I deal with Asians and Kenyans and Arabs and guys from the streets and whatever kind of thing, the baseline is the same. It's a human beings, kind of, right? As a human being, how am I going to deal with you? Where am I going to actually push you to the next particular level? So number one, as we are moving on, the focus has to be less on the syllabus, less on the curriculum, and more on the person. Why are we having all these issues? All you need to do is just go to KOT, okay? Look at the insults that people hurl at each other. The inability to even just respect someone's view or to respond to a view. Yesterday I posted something on social media and someone replied asking, ni pesa ya mama yako? Kind of, instead of addressing the issue, he started abusing me, kind of. And I was like, okay, fine. Whenever someone does that, I go back and say, I have failed as a teacher. We have failed as educators, kind of, to actually make people realize that, listen, when I am addressing you as a person, the first thing I need to do is to respect you as a person. Then respect your view. Then respond to your view. But no, I won't do that. I will insult you, kind of. And some of the most creative insults I've seen is actually on KOT. Kind of, they're brilliant insults. I would actually write a book about them, but it's a failure on our side. So why? Because our focus has never been on the person, has always been the product. You know, kind of the end product is what is success. What is success? Success is material, you know, kind of. So once that becomes our focus, then we've lost it completely, you know? And that is why when you meet, should I say, whether it's a priest from a Catholic side or a priest from the Indian, whatever kind of thing, you know, their humility is the first thing that hits you. It hits you. Why? Because you're not used to meeting humble people. You're used to meeting people, arrogant people, people with pedo, as Wandia would say, you know, kind of who want their presence to be known by what they have, but not what they are. So again, as we are moving towards, you know, kind of the future, we have to put character at the top. And then the others will have to fall into place. Otherwise, you've lost it, you know, kind of completely.
I really like that. And the idea of, when you say pastoral, and also the idea of care comes, and I know Wandia has talked about care, not only to do with the individuals, the students, but also to do with their parents, to growing and nurturing this caring society that, you know, when we say Article 10, the values, you know, our national values are to grow that. Wandia, I know you talk a lot about philosophy and the foundation of education. So let me ask you this question: what is education for? When you keep talking about the philosophy and our framework, what's your concern here?
I think for me, education is about understanding one another and responding together to the issues that confront us. Now, issues could be range from anything from social character issues, like the ones Clifford is talking about, or it could be skills, although I'm not a fan of that conversation. So I think the basic element is that society has to be in conversation, and it has to allow those conversations to happen. And not just one-to-one, like what Clifford is saying about talking to one another, understanding one another, and being able to directly talk to someone and address what they're saying without insulting them or beating them up. There is that level, but there's also the level of being able to come together, talk about the challenges and the promises that we can have together as a society. That is just not in the system. The system we have is for, the philosophy is that people are there for the market. And that's why you hear people saying, will my child get a job from this system? Will the system give my child the skills for the job? But skills and work is only like a fraction of what people do. People have to be parents, they have to be citizens, they have to be members of the world. And they also need those skills, not even skills, they need to be invested as human beings in the betterment of society. So philosophy is very important because the philosophy tells us, why are we doing what we are doing? And unfortunately, the common narrative among Kenyans is that it's for work, that we go to school for work. And that's why we don't invest in character, we don't invest in care, we don't invest in asking ourselves, if somebody is suffering, what should I do? How can I help? All these, you know, social investment of us in each other is not what the system is about. The system is about, it's an instrumentalist philosophy, meaning human beings are there for the market and for an industry. And so whatever you educate them for is for that thing. And that's why I think our social relations are crumbling, because we are not taught how to deal with one another. We are only taught how to prepare ourselves for somebody else and for somebody else to make money. Okay, that's quite humanizing, actually.
But I'm itching to push back because, guys, it sounds great what both of you are saying. But at the end of the day, I have a child. I'm paying fees. I'm doing everything to support my child. They have, you know, they develop all these wonderful character. You know, they're great people, socially adjusted, and then they turn 18, or they turn 21, and I'm like, you know, really, I'm not going to keep feeding you and taking care of you for the rest of your life. At the end of the day, they must be able to get a job. At the end of the day, they must be able to care for themselves. What's the place of that? Because I'm losing that in what you guys are saying. Or at least you seem to be really making it not a priority. And I'm like, hey, come on now, let's be realistic.
You see, character makes sense when you're talking about the economy, because character is what will make people innovative and come up with different ways to earn a living. It will make them also better at the workplace, although I already have an issue with the way the workplace is structured. But more than that, character will make good citizens who will demand solutions to our economic and structural problems. You see, now we are voting very badly. We vote on the basis of name and where people come from, instead of voting on the basis of issues. We are not able to address issues. So there's really a problem with citizenship, that Kenyans, we are not able to demand the kind of economy that would enable our young people to earn a living. Like if they start a business, there will be no problem with credit. They won't have 10,000 licenses to buy. And why do we have a good business environment? Because the citizens are well educated to demand it. So that when somebody comes saying,
Hold that thought. We have it because our citizens are well educated. How do I know they're well educated? I know they're well educated because somebody brings me a certificate. And how did they get that certificate? They did well in school. Those are linked. So yes, I can be building character, but at the end, the kids must pass their exams, right?
Well, they'll pass the exams maybe they'll pass the exams, but 5 years later, they'll be calling someone close to me for help because the child is an alcoholic and can't sort out their life. So I think Kenyans need to hear that money is not everything. Character has a big role to play in how your child turns out. It's not enough to get a job, and as we can see with COVID, jobs are going. So there has to be a constant. And the constant is not the economy, the constant is us. But also the other thing I wanted to say is that this cannot come from the school system alone. Schools are a reflection of society. So if society is not making the investment in itself, in people, in respecting people, in giving them cushions like healthcare or, just a good environment, then the schools are not going to be heaven on earth. They will just replicate the same problems that we are seeing in the rest of society. And so Kenyans must fix society. The adults must do the work. Elections are coming, so people need to vote like parents, not to vote like supporters. They vote for parents according to the issues that will benefit their children.
I kind of like that. People need to vote like parents. I'm going to come to you in a minute and ask you, this education system that you're envisioning that is beyond schooling, it includes schooling, but it's beyond schooling. Let's assume we start working on it. Tell me what it will look like in another 30 years. But before we go there, Clifford, I read an interview where you were talking about Shule Mtaani, and one of the things that was intriguing is you said, you think it's important for the students who you're teaching with your team, the voluntary team that's there, for them to have a certificate, an end of school certificate. Yes. And I'm also imagining that for you as a head teacher, right now, what's sitting at the back of your mind is that everybody's talking about how are we going to complete the curriculum this year for students to be able to do their exams. What's the place of exams in our education system? Why do you think it's important?
Are supposed to be an audit, okay? And I always say they're supposed to audit, if I'm not wrong, 4 or 5 things. And number one, they're supposed to audit the education system. Whatever you have actually said that this is our curriculum, it's supposed to audit. It's like a checklist. You say that we're going to learn this, so it's an audit of those things, right? The second thing they're supposed to audit is actually the teaching learning process. Did it take place? For example, if you give a comprehension on poetry, And the kids did better in nonfiction than in poetry. So it's an audit that poetry actually, either the kids have not understood it or the teacher has not delivered. So it's an audit of the teaching learning process. Number three, it's also an audit of the teacher themselves, kind of, right? So consistently, if there's this teacher who's struggling and whatever, it's an audit, right? Fourth, it's an audit of the student, right? As this student understood. And that is where you find that some students who have been doing very well in the process of the year, when it comes to a one-off exam, they do poorly and and then we judge them based on that. So it's an audit of the student. Unfortunately, we've made exams a complete audit of the students alone. Yeah. And we condemn them to that. So we refuse to look at the bigger picture, and we look at the narrow picture. And that is where the problem comes. Now, back to Shule Mtaani. Of course, I have dropouts. People who have dropped out of standard 2, standard 3, and have gone to the streets, so got them from the streets, and then start to do with them something. The reason I need them to know how to read and write is simple, so that you can actually read a text, send a text, go to the bank, and actually take part in a transaction, right? And eventually, we live in a society, we cannot run away from it. We live in a society whereby the first thing you'll be asked, which class did you reach? Umefika class ngapi? What level of education have you reached? Well, if you say standard 2, that is the end, we don't even have a certificate. It's a country of certificates. So I have to be fair to them and actually throw them into the competition of the rat race, but I have to give them the skills. One of the skills is actually a certificate, right? But you had asked a question about, which I would like to comment on, just give me about a minute, about...
Sure. I just wanted to really make that point. I really like that you said that yes. When it came to exams being an assessment of the student, it is whether the student understood. It is not about whether the student is intelligent. It is not about whether the student is a good person. It is not about whether the student is going to be a success or failure in life. I really, really like that point. So thank you for saying that, but go ahead.
Yes, one of the things about the future, which I was talking about, is should I say what, decompartmentalization, the disconnect between the community and education system, right? Mm-hmm. So here is your 18-year-old who is graduating out of high school, but has been in classrooms from kindergarten to Form 4, classrooms throughout, no job experience, no community service, right? No mentorship programs, nothing completely. And when they go out there at the age of 18, right? Legally, they are adults, but the way they behave, they're still kids. So point number one, which again, I think the Indians have actually perfected, is job placement and apprenticeship, which I think was there in the traditional African society, whereby you had the blacksmith and people would go and learn to be blacksmiths. The carpenters, it was there. But when you started looking down upon those manual jobs and say that the most important thing is actually to speak English from the nose and that kind of thing, the book education became more important than, should I say what? The manual jobs, then everyone ran away from that. And when all these, should I say, universities started mushrooming and whatever kind of thing. So back to your question is, from the time they reach secondary school, Form 1 up to Form 4, all these students have to be exposed to job placements, whereby they have mentors at the job place, and it will help them to think, oh, this is a workplace, this is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. I don't like this kind of thing and whatever kind of thing. If we kind of work on that system, then by the time they're reaching Form 4 and doing their exams, they have an idea more or less of where they want to go, or more importantly, where they don't want to go, right? But they've met in their secondary school life, they've met more people in job placements than they've met their teachers in school. Right now, it's just their teachers and then careers where people just tell you, come and talk about this career, and then they disappear. And that is it. There's just no connection completely. And that's where we are failing.
Okay, and so what I want to, and you've actually taken us, you've made the transition, thank you for that, is to come to this space. So this is what I'm going to say to both of you. The year is 2050. And I have the absolute pleasure to be asked to moderate at 2 events. Both of them are fest shifts. And the fest shift is where you really celebrate somebody who's done an amazing body of work. And in each of these cases, quite coincidentally, it's a group of people who have come to me and said, my teacher has taught me something, or our teacher has taught us something. And we have taken those lessons on board, and we have gone on, and we've spent the last 20 years, we have transformed the state of education in Kenya. Everybody is looking at Kenya as the example of what an education system is going to be. And Clifford, I already have a sense that yours will say that we have this well integrated. But I'll start with Wandia, because I had given her a bit of time to start thinking. Wandia, when people come to celebrate Mwalimu Njoya and to say that here we are your students, look at what we have accomplished because of what you taught us. Give me 3 characteristics of that education system that they have created. What would it look like? Remember, it's 2050. So we have 30 years to build it. It's not so much about what's wrong with today. It's about what your students, after listening to you, after taking hold of your dream, have created. What would that look like?
I would hope that my students will have created community centers where people can come to talk. Others will have created libraries, public libraries, where people can come and borrow books and discuss books. And then the third group is people who actually take care of society through whatever profession they do. I'm very biased, of course, to the caring professions like teaching, medicine, even social services like environment. The people who ask, how are human beings surviving and are they doing well? So those are the 3 things I would really hope to see. People who are interested in knowledge creation, in encouraging society to create knowledge together, and people who care for society in whatever profession they are in. That would be my dream. And because of that, I'm not very invested in improving the school system until we open up the channels for knowledge production in the society as a whole. The artists are really struggling, and yet the artists are literally our prophets. They are the people who tell us where we have been, and they give us the space to imagine what we could be. We have not given enough platforms, enough spaces for them to perform and put up their work. And yet that is a group of people who will help Kenya imagine. And then, like I said, I think we need more libraries. And the devolution was supposed to have enabled counties to have libraries in their counties. And I would dream of having libraries in sub-counties and even towns, just so that people can integrate what they are learning with what the rest of the world is also doing. I would like to see more festivals, like having 47 major festivals, 1 in every county. And what you do is you just have a calendar, and everybody, you can decide this year I'm going to this festival here, this year I'm going here. Because festivals are where people bring their knowledge together. It's not just about performance, where they also bring their knowledge together. So I would like to see a Kenya that values knowledge and that values the social process of creating knowledge, because knowledge is not created in isolation. It's created through conversation, and so we need more spaces where that can happen. I think if we did that, then people would not be so nervous about which school system is a school going to give my child a job, because there's already creativity happening there's innovation, there's invention, there's so many things happening outside the school, so that it's not such a struggle for kids to get into contact with these things outside the school system. Right now, the school is everything to everybody, and I think the school is collapsing under the weight. It can't be all things to all men.
Okay, and I'm going to, I know I need to go to questions and bring in participants, and I want to encourage those who are on this call. You could start to put your questions. I see we've already got a couple of questions. You can either put it in the question and answer session part, or you could put it in the chat, and I'll be coming to those in a few minutes. Wandia, not if we are going to create it, your students create, I'm telling you, in 2050, believe me, your students have done it. I'll come back to you in a moment, and I want you to tell me the 2 big challenges that your students managed to, that we are still, maybe in those of you in 2020, you're struggling with, but by 2050, your students have finished, they have dealt with it. I want you to give me those 2. Mwalimu Clifford, what are we celebrating you for? What new vision have you brought to us?
Oof, okay, that's a tough one. I am looking at 4 different areas. I want to be celebrated for the day KCPE or KCSE or national exams will be conducted in different languages. I want my students to do that. We have all these people who have to translate from mother tongue to Kiswahili to English. By the time they're writing KCSE exams, they get D because they think in mother tongue. And we laugh at them, kind of, this guy thinks in mother tongue, kind of, right? 2050, I want to see KCSE, kind of, so that I say that, oh, this guy studied in Kikuyu medium. This guy studied in Kalenjin medium, kind of, and got an A. And actually studied English as a subject, not as a language. That's one thing I want to see. The other thing I want to see, which Mwalimu Njoya has not mentioned, it's her pet project, is a TVET, okay? I want to see TVETs more as hubs rather than TVETs, kind of where any child from nursery school to Form 4 can actually go into a TVET and be exposed to what you call practical ways of doing something or innovative ways. So TVETs more to be like hubs rather than TVET for the sake of TVET, kind of, right? So that I don't use a pencil and I don't know where a pencil has ever come from. I've never seen. But if from standard 1, I go and actually get involved in the making of a pencil, right? It will actually trigger something about my innovation and my creativity, okay? I want to see, again, that I've talked about, I want to see community involvement. And here I have to say that religious centers have to step up completely. The religious centers, I grew up in an area whereby the Catholic Church in Jericho was actually a center whereby we all met. People from different denominations met, and we played badminton, we played table tennis, we played football, we played all these things. It brought people together. And more than that, we actually had study groups, like way in the 70s and 80s, had study groups. So it became actually a community center, And next to the community center was a Jericho Social Hall, which had a TV. So if you wanted to watch something, kind of, the guys who wanted to go into boxing, there was boxing over there. The guys wanted to go into whatever, karate, there was karate over there. All these community centers brought people together, right? We've become so individual and we just become like all these, we've gone into cocoons whereby we're looking into ourselves, we're not looking into others. So I want to see my guys going into community centers. And finally, of course, the last one, is character. Character. I want to see my students, kind of going back to what Wandia said, going back and giving back to the community, not because it's a CSR for the sake of a CSR, but because I'm privileged. I'm privileged because I'm healthy. I'm privileged because I'm alive, okay? So I have to take care of people who are unhealthy or who are unfortunate because of A, B, C, D, and whatever. I have to share with them. I have to share my time. I have to share my knowledge. I have to share my resources. That's what I want to see my students doing. Good. Thank you.
That's an amazing vision. I'm putting them together and I can see an education system that's centered on the community, where the question of character and values is really what drives this education system. It is multilingual, it celebrates the diversity of who we are as a people, and knowledge is integrated into society. So we don't have, you know, the whole vision, the whole thing that people talk about, an ivory tower, but it is so seamless that kids are learning about life, are participating in preparing themselves, not in an artificial way, for the lives they're going to live. It's innovative. At the heart of this is arts. At the heart of it is culture. Nowadays, I know, we talk a lot about STEAM. STEAM is now, people are beginning to say, yes, we want science and technology, but we also recognize that we must have arts, we must have culture right at the heart of it. And that this is an education system that embraces the community, is embraced by the community. It is easily knit in with everything that's going on. I'm going to questions, and we're going to have a conversation for those of you who are just joining us. This is the Corona Café on reimagining education, having done so in both health and social, and the question of social inequality, with Walimu, Wandia Njoya, and Clifford Oluoch. And before I go to the questions that I have, very quickly, you don't need to elaborate. Just each of you tell me, what are the two things, the two challenges, the two things that we must be able to grapple with and successfully deal with before we get from where we are today to where we'll be in 2050? Wandia?
Philosophy, you know, why do we educate? I don't know whether, and work, you know, what is work and how do we make work dignifying, creative, and communal?
Okay, thank you very much. Clifford.
I don't know whether I can count up to two.
Okay, even one. The thing you think we must deal with.
Yeah, for me, it's just individualism, you know, kind of become so selfish as a society completely that we're losing the bigger picture and we're focusing on the smaller picture. And the smaller picture actually now is ourselves. That to me is where we need to move out of ourselves to the rest.
Okay, that's really great. And thank you very much for that. I want to just give a couple of comments before I go to the questions. Mercy Ndondo thinks that what Dr. Wandia has mentioned about extending our imagination and creativity to be very illuminating. And she notes that right now online learning is barely reaching marginalized communities, and we should crowdsource context-based solutions to ensure that learning continues. Carol is really appreciating the idea of Shule Mtaani. She really likes that concept. Then we have somebody who's anonymous but asks, what would be the place of learners in the development and delivery of the education system that we're talking about? You know, because right now we're in a situation where parents-led education system is the one that's driving and taking this country towards self-reliance. So what would the place be of learners in this education system? And Peggy Mativo has a similar question, so I'm going to bring that up at the same time. She asks, how do we create a society where it's safe for children, for the kids, the children themselves to say, I don't know, and then start looking for different possible answers? So I think both of them are asking, how do we put children, how do we put the learners at the center of our education system? Any of you?
Okay, I'll go first. Unfortunately, the learner will never be, should I say, take a role in learning. Okay, a lead role. Let me put it that way. The reason is, for all those people who take the kids to schools, right? It's the parents who choose the school. That's number one. Of course, there are many factors as well. Even homeschooling, it's the parents who decide that, listen, I'm not going to take you to places where your morals are going to be corrupted and whatever kind of thing. We never consult the learners about what they're supposed to do. That's the first thing. The second thing, again, the syllabus, which is again, top bottom, you know, kind of, right? Starting with what they're supposed to study at engineering, and then breaking it down up to where they're supposed to do in standard one. Again, the learner is not involved, you know, right? One of the things that online learning has actually shown is that the learning process can be accelerated if the student is within their own space. Hence, homeschoolers will have that advantage. You can actually move faster, right? rather than when you're in school. So yes, once the learner is there, the school has been chosen for him, even the school uniform has been chosen for him, the timetable has been chosen for him, everything has been chosen for him, okay? How can we involve the learner into learning? The whole process of, should I say, a facilitator into a student is actually to light a fire, to intrigue the students into asking questions. And that goes back to the teacher, who should not always be, like, should I say, lecturing at maybe at the higher level they can lecture. At the lower levels, you're not actually lecturing. You are actually, should I say, facilitating learning. And here you have to look more for the whys rather than the what and the who's and everything. I've seen very many, back to exams, very many exam questions, you know, kind of where the students are asked questions. What about flipping it? What they call the flip classroom. What about flipping so that you give the students answers and ask them, give me questions. And they would be like, oh, okay, what question am I going to ask you now? You know, kind of, right? What about what they call the flip classroom, whereby now, instead of giving you homework to go and do at home, okay, why don't I give you homework to do in school? And then when you go at home, you go and prepare for tomorrow's lesson. Complete flipping, which is what the innovation and the creativity that Njoya was talking about. We have moved away from the content-based learning that was there in the 70s and 80s and 90s. Now we're no longer into content and knowledge-based. Now it's innovation. So the facilitator has to change their approach. But just the last one is some of the students that I take care of in the slums, they've got homework. And the homework is copying notes from a textbook to an exercise book. They have the textbook. Okay, so I was asking them, why are you copying notes? Says, no, the teacher said that if you copy the notes, we're learning more. And I'm like, okay, that's what we did in the 80s. We can't be doing exactly the same thing of copying notes, drawing a map, you know, kind of, what do you mean you're drawing a map? The map is already there. Google is already there. Atlases are out of completely fashion. What are you drawing a map for? You know, completely. So we need to flip that. The reason why we are still taking the learners the way we took them in the 70s is because that's how we learned, and that's how we think is the best way of learning, right? And then again, group discussions, right? Collaborative learning, which is like one of the skills, the essential skills of 21st century, you know, kind of, we move into that. Let the students lead their lessons rather than the facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's about working together. We're teaching people, not teaching content. And so figuring out how to work together as the learners and the teachers to be able to do that. I know we've got a number of questions, so I'm going to direct each question maybe to one or to the other. Wandia, I'm going to ask this question from Virginia, because I think this is something you're really invested in. She asks, what active roles are I think being taken to ensure that education and training systems align to the industry? And I think it is the whole place of preparing students to go and work in the industry.
Are you sure that's for me? I don't believe in industry anymore. Oh dear. I just encourage the person to check my blog at wandianjoya.com, where I explain a little bit more. I feel that the way the industry is structured right now is not human. It alienates us from our work. It gives people very little say about what they want to produce. It doesn't, you know, once we enter the workplace, our knowledge keeps growing, but we are treated as if our skills are supposed to remain stagnant where they were when we first got employed. So there are many issues I have with the way industry is currently structured, and I feel that that is what is now making the school system a bit tight and rigid, because we are trying to fit people in a very narrow industry. So I would say that we actually need to ask more questions about the way the industry is structured in Kenya. We have so much regulation, so many licenses, and so little incentives for people at the bottom to start their own things. So I think that already needs to be checked. The other thing is that there's a fundamental irony in the Kenyan public, that on one hand, they say they don't want people to be educated for employment, but then at the same time, they are saying they want people to have skills for the industry. I think we need to decide as Kenyans what we really want when it comes to work and what we want education for. And that's why I was saying, for me, I think the question we need to ask besides what are schools doing is how is the workplace structured? That is a problem that we haven't quite resolved, because we inherited institutions at independence that we have not changed. So they're still operating on the same logic, and I think they need to be revised. And unfortunately, the education system did not give us enough historical and cultural knowledge to ask those kinds of questions. So I'm not invested in industry anymore, because I tried to sell my soul to the industry and it did work no matter what. So now I've just said, let's educate for other things other than, and then the industry can benefit if it benefits. They let them find out how to benefit from it. Sorry, that I know that was not the answer that was desired, but that's what I'm saying. I would be willing to engage.
It does challenge us to think about this link between work and, you know, we often hear, you know, we're training for an industry and the industries are telling us the students aren't meeting their needs. So it helps us think a little bit more about that. Clifford, Lydia Muthuma has several questions, and what I want to do is try to bunch them. And I think I've seen a couple of other people who are asking for, especially for teachers or educationists who in this moment are trying to deliver education online. Is there a way to post educational materials or on virtual, you know, platforms, whichever ones that they are, that would help assist learners? What is the advice you would give for people who are trying to make do with what they have during this period? And perhaps if you want to comment also on the question of assessment online during this period, what is it that we can do?
Thank you. I saw the one of assessment, and for me, do we have to assess them? Do we really need to assess them? You know, and the answer is no, we don't. Okay. As I've said, when the space opens up and people go back to formal schooling, then we can go back to formal assessment. Right now, there's no use of stressing people of you've been having all these online assessments, so online classes. So let's assess you so that we can know where you are. Why are we assessing them? You know, kind of, right? Again, I go back to the 70s and 80s where repeating classes was very normal, you know, kind of, right? Because you didn't get it. Nowadays, people hardly repeat classes because it's different, right? The end product is not to pass an exam, of course it is, right? But to get the essential skills that will actually make you fit into the society. So assessment, not necessary at all. The other one about online material and that kind of thing, unfortunately, again, we are pulling in different directions. We have all these teachers who have got brilliant ideas, but they don't know how to bring it into one and come up with regular lessons. And it's something that I would really be willing to take up with one or two willing teachers. I think one of them has done it. I think Dennis Omolo, I saw your comment over there. He tried a Zoom whereby teachers were invited to teach and students were invited to attend free lessons and whatever kind of thing, but it didn't go very far. So apart from the schools that have those formal online classes, the ones that don't have, it's up to the teachers to get together, you know, kind of offer those lessons and then let the students attend them. But if you're waiting for Serikali this idea, then it's not going to happen. We have to do it. We have to push it. Okay. So any Somolo challenge to you?
Okay, thank you. David Mwangela is wondering, what would those community centers look like? Wandia, maybe you can help us just a little bit. You know, are they going to be addressing specific issues that face the communities? What's the purpose of taking these centers into the community?
I think the community centers would be a place for lifelong learning. So apart from having artistic performances done by everybody from the children to the adults, you can have guest speakers from other counties come and share their knowledge about growing a certain product or making a certain thing, or just coming to tell stories. And that one is very important. Telling the history of our communities and the people in our country or even around the world. That would be the place where people would come to listen to those things. So you can have a series like, Teachers of Kenya, and then you have different teachers coming to say their histories, or you can have Doctors of Kenya, or even, Kajo, stories of Kajo. How did people survive in the 80s and how are they surviving today? I think there are so many interesting stories that need to be told, and the community centers would be the place to do it. So for art, for knowledge, I think it's for mainly arts and knowledge, and where people can come together also and think about politics. And I don't mean politics in terms of parties, but in terms of this is what we want our MP to do. Where is the place that we are going to tell him what we need? Then that would be the place. So it's just where you would hold your barazas, lifelong learning sessions, performances, everything that brings the community together.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions that are about the different players who come together. Rebecca Crook asks, how might we support equal partnership between youth and adults in reimagining education? So it's not just, how it's done by policy players and by people, the adults who know. And she was building on a question by Teresa Bagaya, where she asked, what does parental engagement done well look like? And picking up from what you said, Wandia, that many learners are raised by grandparents. So, and then there was another question from Dennis, which had to do with teachers. What role do teachers play in moving this transformative vision? So my sense is that people are saying, okay, we buy into this idea, but how do we make sure that the youth, the parents, the grandparents, the teachers, all of us are part of this, bringing this education together? What are some of the things that you can say? I don't know if we've lost Clifford. Oh, there you are. And I'm going to ask both of you, just quickly, how do we bring these different disparate groups into this space?
I think we already talked about the community center. I mean, that's the whole point of the community center. Is actually, it's a hub, right? Mm-hmm. It's just a hub of activity and a buzz of activities, right? That's number one. Secondly, again, I'll talk about mainly a little bit about Shule Mtaani, whereby we have secondary school students taking care of primary school students, which is, again, should I say, the scout movement has got that kind of system whereby the older ones take care of the younger ones or whatever kind of thing, which was what was there in the traditional African society. So we have aspects of that, kind of. The only thing is that we lose it when we go to schools where the teacher is the authority, kind of, and the student has got absolutely no input into whatever is happening. That is why we lose it. And that is why the inquisitive 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, by the time they reach 12, 13 and university, they're completely passive, kind of. They're not used to that kind of combative way of, should I say, taking on ideas and questioning them. They're not used to that. So we lose it somewhere there. So that question that says, how can we involve the youth and the adults, kind of, the adults need to step down and let the youth, kind of question. And then you guide. Yours is to guide, to facilitate. But right now it is to suppress, kind of, the way Wandia was saying, kind of that professor chip on the shoulder of, I know, so shut up. Kind of, you got that attitude and that whatever kind of thing. No, we are the facilitators. We are the ones who are ending up killing all these brilliant minds and all these ideas, kind of. We, the adults, are the ones who are killing it. So we need to open ourselves. We need to let ideas, kind of come. And then let the youth kind of take over and we guide them. But right now, no.
Okay, so it's really, Wandia, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, two things I wish parents would do. One is keep affirming your child that no matter how they perform, they'll be okay. That what matters is that they do their best. And this is not even, this one came from my mother, that's what she did, and I think it worked. that you boost your child's self-esteem and let them know that they are more than their academic performance, and that what matters is that they do their best. The second thing is a work ethic. And work is not about just academics and sitting down and doing the homework. Make them wash dishes, you know, and I'm not talking about exploitation. I hope they'll be able to know the difference, but do it with them, you know, cook with them, do the garden with them. If during the holidays, if you need to transport something, go with them, because your work is what teaches them to work. And that work doesn't have to be, you know, doctor, engineer, lawyer, those ones. You know, just even if you're selling things, let your child see what it is that you do, because children don't know what work is. They don't see it. They just hear that the parent went to work and came home and there was money. But they need to see what work looks like and to have a work ethic, because that is what keeps them going after school. So teaching them to be confident and to believe in themselves, and then work and to be disciplined at the work. You know, we tend to think of discipline as being beaten when you do wrong, but discipline is being able to stick to a task to completion. And that sticking at it, even when it gets difficult, is what our children need. They need to know how to stick to the task until it's completed, so that they learn how to be. That's what discipline is, and we are lacking that discipline in our society. It's not even just young people. For example, just to give us a small example, like when I tell students to do projects, immediately they come across a hurdle, they give up, and then they come back to me and say, "Oh, Mwalimu, we've not been able to do it." But you know, I tell them you have to push. You know, ask different questions, find out whether there's something else you're missing, you know, keep at it. That kind of discipline is what our children need. And that, unfortunately, I don't think can come from the school. It has to come from the parents and from society.
Thank you. And you've almost, I think you read my mind about the question I wanted. There's a whole bunch of questions that have to do with what are the practical things we can do now during this pandemic season. Mercy asks, what practical solutions can we as educators come up with now? Virginia Nfekathe asked, how can we utilize this time when kids are at home to provision cultural education? And I think Lydia Muthuma had asked about must values education be put on hold because of the pandemic. So to those parents, to those who are thinking about how do we start to bring this to being, and not just parents, anybody, what's the one thing each of you would tell them, this is the one practical project I am telling you go and do as we come towards the end?
Read books.
Read books.
Just read. Storybooks.
Okay.
You can never go wrong with storybooks. I normally say I'm yet to meet someone who reads books and is stupid or is thick or is whatever, slow in reasoning. Just read storybooks. That's it. As many as you can. The only thing you need to do is to vary the genres, right? So make sure you have biographies, autobiographies, you have nonfiction, you have science fi. Read books. Just read. That's it. If schools close for 1 year, read books. When you come back, it will be like physical exercise and the mind will be ready for the rest. Don't bother with past papers, sorry, okay? Don't invest in those things. I don't know, revision books and I don't know what and whatever kind of thing. Just read books, storybooks. That's it, that's all.
Okay, Wandia?
It's so good, yes. Storybooks, and then I would say, go to your shosho, your auntie, ask them, what did you do when you were my age? That's it. She will tell you about how the city was or the village was, and that's already history, how things used to be done those days. Yeah, they just need to go and sit at an elder's feet and listen to stories. So there's the reading of the stories, but they can also go and listen to the elders telling about their lives. And they'll be surprised how much they can learn about the history of their counties, the history of Nairobi, the history of everywhere, just by somebody saying, when I was young, this is what I used to do. This was the bus I used to take. Those days we didn't have this. Yeah, they just need to hear stories.
Clifford, I have, as I come to the end, one question, perhaps a final question. Muruki Kagodo is asking, how do you envision us incorporating social emotional learning into the curriculum, very, very precisely into the curriculum, to build interpersonal and interpersonal values and interpersonal relationships into the curriculum?
It's a long question.
Yes, but just think, social emotional learning, how do we incorporate that into the curriculum?
I don't think it's about the curriculum, right? I think it's about one, tradition and culture of the school and of a country, okay? For us, our tradition and culture has been very academic oriented. So interpersonal skills and social skills and emotional intelligence is completely out of the question. It's not our culture, it's not our tradition. You can't really put these things in our curriculum. You can't, right? In fact, you shouldn't. But all teachers by training should actually be people who make sure that all these things are actually emphasized, strengthened in the school. That's the job of a teacher. So if you're going to do that, go to the teacher training colleges. Train the teachers to make sure that when they are delivering whatever they're delivering, they're dealing with human beings, number one. They're dealing with human beings, number two. And they're dealing with human beings, number three. Right now, we're dealing with a syllabus. We're dealing with a curriculum. And we're dealing with an exam. We're not dealing with human beings, right? So if we want to do that, we go back and we change our perspective that we're dealing with human beings. That's the bottom line. Once you do that and you treat the students like human beings, everything will fall into place. Right now, we are not, hence we are paying for it.
Okay, Wandia, final question for you on policy. Do you think there are existing policies to open up elite schools? Because you talked about that, to pupils coming from different social backgrounds. What kind of a policy do you think, scholarships, because of what you said about it seeking to define, what kind of policies might we put in place that opens up the educational space?
Yeah, I'm a believer in affirmative action. I think the elite schools should try to have a diversity of people from ethnic and class backgrounds, because it also enriches the experience of even the other children who attend that school. But that must be seen as a temporary measure. It cannot be permanent, because we have to still resolve the questions that are plaguing society. And in fact, what I would say is that parents need to be more political in terms of demanding better policy for their children. You know, the teachers, of course, we have a lot of homework to do in terms of rethinking what education is, but we need a conducive society that supports creative education. And so I think parents also now have to start asking themselves the questions about their citizenship. What are they demanding at the political level for their schools? So that personally, I think we need a public education system and to end this privatization, and then that will force us to make our schools good. But that's just a practical solution. I think there needs to be a more community engagement about the society we want, because we can't have children being educated to be better than what is in society. Unfortunately, that's the hard truth. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I can hardly believe that we've actually been on this for 90 minutes, and the questions and the comments are fantastic. I just want to encourage anybody who will be joining our next conversation. You really want to be within the group, because such amazing, I cannot even read all of them, but their comments, I'm appreciating the focus on culture, appreciating the focus of language. I'll just mention a couple of those as I come to both of you and ask you to think about your closing remark. What are the priorities you want to leave in our minds? but I've loved to see so many people engaged on the question of how all of us as a community, somebody said, we need to come out of our bubbles. Conversations on teacher education, which we haven't been able to go into, a couple of questions on the curriculum and how we can infuse the curriculum with many more things. It's such a joy to see so many of you engaging so actively on the chat. But now as we come to the end, Clifford and Wandia, okay, I know I didn't get to ask you, what are the 1 or 2 big problems that we absolutely must deal with? Yeah, your students will deal with this before we get to 2050. So can you just give them some leakage, as we say, so that they know what they have to deal with, even as you make your last comments? And I don't mind whichever of you wants to go first. Tell us what are the 2 problems that we must immediately get exercised in solving. And then secondly, give us your final words as walimu wakuu to take with us as we finish.
Okay. Who goes first? Wandia.
I think we need to ask what kind of society we want. That will answer the kind of education we get. And Kenyans need to be brave. They need to find it in their heart to want us to be a human society again, so that we stop being selfish and individualist and unable to grow our minds. So for me, that's what I would leave Kenyans with, that please start to think about what kind of a society we want, so that we educate our children for that society.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Mwalimu Wandia. I know everybody calls you Dr. Njoya. Dr. Wandia, Mwalimu, thank you so much. Clifford. Odijo, what are your last words?
Odijo, my last words is, unfortunately, we'll always be judged by what you have rather than what you are. So my students have to live with that, that irrespective of however much good you do and whatever kind of thing, people will always look at, what are you getting out of it? What do you have? Not what are you, kind of. And to me, my lesson throughout is like, what are you as a person? What are you? What is this person? That is my final one, kind of. And of course, to everyone who's been here and everything, is all you need to do is just extend to the next person or to the next society that is next to you, the next community. Just help the person next to you. You never know what difference it will be. Whether it means paying school fees for the watchman's kids or for your maid's kids and everything, just do it. You have no idea who you are investing in. Good.
I want to thank both of you in the words that have come from the participants. Joyce Ngugi says, what a riveting discussion. It shook me to my bones. Thank you all. And I absolutely agree with her. Anton says, asanteni sana walimu. So refreshing, hopeful, and insightful a conversation this was. As I say farewell and thank you both of you, I just want to remind everybody that these conversations are going up both on the Elephant website and on the Alliance Francaise YouTube, so you can catch them after this and share them with other people. I want to thank both the Elephant, Alliance Francaise, and IFRA Nairobi, who have been our hosts on this great discussion, and ask you to look forward to the next one, which will be happening in a fortnight. It may not be on the Tuesday, we might play around with the date a little bit, but it will be about a fortnight from now, when we'll be talking about the economy. Thank you very, very much. And I leave you with these words from Rebecca Crook. Why do we learn? Who gets to decide? What world are we reimagining during the pandemic? And what does that mean when it comes to education? Reimagine Kenya, reimagine education. Thank you very much.